guys, so before I get started, I just wanted to say that every adoptee story is unique and I do not in any way suggest that I speak for every Korean adoptee. I just want to share my personal experience with adoption and hopefully help and inform others in similar situations. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So short story short, I was born in Seoul to a very young single mother, and right after my birth I went to live with a foster family, and I lived with them for almost 4 months, and that's when I met my lovely mom and dad for the first time. And after that I went to Sweden, and that's where I have been living up till now. I do have some information about my birth mother. I do not have any information about my birth father, and as my life is right now, I have decided not to look for them, but that is a subject to change, I guess. Thanks to my parents, I have always been very aware of my adoption, and for as long as I can remember, I have always wanted to go back. And I guess because of that, I always felt kind of in touch with my Korean roots, and I always felt like that was a part of me that I wanted to explore and I wanted to nurture. I remember being like 6 or 7 or 8, telling my mom and dad like, oh, you know what, when I'm in the 7th grade, I'm gonna go to Korea. And even though it wasn't in the 7th grade, it was like in the 8th grade. So 7 years ago, I went back to Korea for the first time. And since 2016, I have been back every year. My first impression of Korea was like, wow. I was really impressed by the country, and I instantly felt at home. And even though I was a really young teenager, I kinda had a feeling that this wasn't gonna be a one-time thing and that I would come back, which I did. And even though it kinda sounds like a cliche, it honestly kinda felt like I had found a missing part of my identity. After returning from Korea for the first time, I kinda put South Korea on this pedestal, and I really looked up to the country, and I honestly thought that it was the best country in the whole world. But now that the honeymoon phase has faded and I've spent more and more time here, I have come to the realization that South Korea is like any other country. It has good sides, but it also has some bad sides. I feel like there's a lot of complex things about living in Korea as a Korean adoptee. One of them being too Swedish. One of the hardest things I had to come to terms with was that even though I look like everyone else, I didn't really act like everyone else. During my childhood, I had no exposure whatsoever to Korean culture, except for some Korean food that my mom used to make me for my birthday every year. But even though I really wanted to fit into this birth country of mine so badly, I kind of had to come to terms with that I am and I will always be Swedish at heart, and that's okay. This kind of goes hand in hand with being too Swedish, and like sometimes situations occur where my physical appearance doesn't really come in handy, and one aspect of that is of course the language. Everyone here understandably speaks Korean with me, and like now I think it's kind of okay because I've been learning Korean on and off for like 2 years. But in the beginning, and like the first time I came back, it was kind of hard for the teenage me to accept that I didn't really meet the surrounding people's expectations of me, and that was a really difficult thing to like come to terms with. Another thing that isn't necessarily a hardship, but is more like an inconvenience, is the explaining and making people uncomfortable. I understand that people have questions and I understand why they ask, but sometimes it does get a little bit annoying to like tell your whole life story again and again, and sometimes multiple times a day. Like everything else, of course, there are some advantages as well about living in Korea as a Korean adoptee. And one thing is that everything fits. Since I've been living my whole life in Sweden, where I am kind of considered to be more on the shorter side, finding clothes, especially jeans, that fit me has always been kind of a problem, but here, everything fits me like a freaking glove. Also, makeup in Sweden tend to be more towards the cooler pinkish toned colors, whereas here I feel like the colors kind of suits my complexion a bit better. One thing that I really appreciate about being here in Korea is that I feel like people view me as a person with unique features. And let me try to explain what I mean by that. I am from a smaller city in Sweden where most of the population is made up of Caucasian people. And growing up, it wasn't uncommon for me to be labeled as like the Asian girl or the Korean girl, and sometimes even the Chinese girl. But like my non-pop friends would be labeled more as like, oh, you know, the girl with the pretty lashes, or the girl with the curly hair, or the boy wearing glasses, you know? And here in Korea, I do not feel like people view my physical appearance as something collective, but rather as something unique. One situation that really stuck with me was 2 years ago when my Korean teacher called me the pretty girl. And I was honestly so surprised, so happy, and so grateful, because pretty has never been an adjective that I have been associated with ever, like ever. So that comment made me kind of appreciate my physical appearance a lot more. So if you're watching this, 선생님, 감사합니다. Another thing that's a really big advantage about living here in Korea is the fortune to have access to two cultures. I do not claim in any way to be culturally Korean, because I'm not, but it is kind of nice to have the opportunity to explore a culture that in other circumstances would have been your own. For me, coming back to Korea has been so helpful in shaping my identity as a young adult, and I do not think that I would be able to come to terms with some of the things I've struggled with during my childhood if it wasn't for me returning. I have now accepted that I am in some ways both Swedish and Korean, and that is okay, and I do not have to fit in anywhere. I can be both, and that's a really nice thing to have and to know. Now I'm honestly just trying to immerse myself as much as I can in the country and the culture, and hopefully one day be able to speak Korean somewhat fluently. The last thing I want to say is that the decision to be adopted was never mine to make, but by returning and getting to know the country that I was born in, I kind of feel like I am reclaiming the right to the Korean part of me that I never had a chance to get to know. And that, at least for me, has been a really important and empowering process. Even though this was a lot different from the videos I usually make, I hope that you enjoyed it and found it helpful or meaningful in some way. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so I can see you in my next video. Bye!